Hey, welcome back to the podcast, the Evil Dungeon Master Universe podcast. I am your host, Vince. Today is Monday, and it's time for a new podcast here on my channel, podcast channel, I don't know, whatever you want to call it. Anyway, I was looking around for some interesting things to talk about today. I was going through some of my magazine. Oh yeah, theevildm.com is my website, as well as Ask the Evil DM. TheEvilDM.com is my email address, or you can contact me, facebook.com/TheEvilDungeonMaster, if you want to chat or talk about some things about the show, give me some ideas. But today, I was looking through some old Dragon magazines that I had. And now, Dragon magazine was not something I normally used when I was younger playing D&D. Now, the best of was something we did use because we figured that was probably acceptable with some of the things. Though some of the things in best of Dragon magazines were very OP. But the main group that we played in with DM Joe, the original person who showed us D&D, did not like using Dragon magazines. And rightly so. A lot of the classes and stuff in Dragon magazine were very overpowered, sometimes not play tested, and a lot of times he even said not suitable for campaigns or players, so he kind of stuck with that. No, I don't blame him, but also, me being younger, my parents not like Dungeons and Dragons in the 80s, me buying one of these magazines, as cheap as it probably was, around, I think it was $2, I still was not able to do it. So I never really used these magazines and never really thought to use these magazines. As time passed and I got older, yeah, sure, I grabbed some Dragon magazines around 3rd and 4th edition era of D&D just to read them, keep up with things. I think they stopped them after somewhere around 4th, right? I don't remember. It wasn't something on my list. But Dragon magazine number 68 has an interesting mechanic in it, using ability scores to determine success or failure. Now, I've done this in the past by using the attribute or the ability score and rolling certain 6-sided dice to get under the number. Sometimes it worked out really well, sometimes it did not because the number's too low. I always did 3d6, roll below your number to succeed, which didn't always work out because sometimes if you had an 18, you were always going to roll below. So I'd add a 4th die, roll below just for that percentage, but it's not really fair to a player because they have a higher stat. You're going to add an extra die for their failure, and not good. So this one is by Catherine Kerr, and it says using ability scores to determine success or failure. You always have a chance. You always got a chance. It goes on to say on page 110, I'm not going to read the descriptor or anything like that. I'm just going to get into the nitty gritty of it. On page 110 of the AD&D Dungeon Master's Guide, it is written that the DM can control any situation not specifically covered in the rules by assigning a reasonable probability for an event and letting the player roll the dice and attempt to meet it. There are times, however, when assigning the reasonable probability leads to unreasonable results, arguments, delays, and doubts. Often the DM is baffled as to how to assign such probability. Players, quick as jackals to pick up on the signs of weakness of this sort, argue that the probability is much higher than a DM's guess. So, outlined below are some guidelines for players and DMs alike to help such probabilities for unforeseen events. Tongue twister for me this morning. To begin with, even the most complex game situation can be broken down into respective parts. At the root of all such questions, like our example, is a special matter of success or failure, which basic parts of the character's situation in which the character finds him or herself. The player character wishes to perform an action successfully in a situation where his or her prospects for success or degree of success may be altered by varying circumstances. To be successful, the character performing an action must use certain skills. If the DM keeps these divisions of the game problem in mind, his or her job will be much easier. First, the DM must consider the makeup of the player character. In deciding whether or not the character can perform an action, the DM should use the basic part of the AD&D game system, the character ability scores. Since each score is a measure of aptitude for performing certain kinds of actions, these scores are the tools for pinning down elusive probabilities for success of an action. For instance, the intelligence score shows the character's aptitude for thinking correctly and clearly. From this point of view, the DM may turn the score into a percentage chance. For the character using the skill in question, multiply the ability score by 5 gives a number that we call a basic skill percentage. Applying this to the ability scores of a fighter, for example, we get a strength of 18 times 5 equals 90% chance of using a strength. Intelligence of 8 times 5 is a 40% of thinking correctly. Wisdom of 9, 45. Chances of wising up. I like how they wrote that. Dexterity of 14 times 70% chance of manipulating objects. Constitution of 17, 85% chance of withstanding stress. Charisma of 10 times 5, chance of persuading others. Interesting. These basic percentages may be applied to the game situations in the following way. First, break the disputed action into steps if it's more than one specific action is involved. An example, the fighter must grab the swaying rope, then climb it. All right, so we got two things going there. Second, determine which skill or skills to be used in each step. Grabbing the rope requires dexterity, and climbing requires strength. Thus, the fighter has a 70% chance to grab the rope when he jumps to the rope, and a base chance of 90% chance to climb it up if he succeeds when grabbing it. Often a situation arises where two or more skills play a part into one action. To get the base chance of these circumstances, simply average the percentage required, rounding up if necessary. In our example, the fighter will need both strength and dexterity to pull himself onto the ledge once he's made the climb. 70 plus 90 divided by 2 equals 80% base chance of scrambling over the ledge successfully. So if your fighter is running and he runs to grab that rope and climb that rope to get up on the ledge, instead of having the player roll 2 successful rolls, you could just divide it, add the 2 together, divide it by 2, get a base, and have him roll once. I like that. Once the DM has a base chance for success, he or she may consider whether the situation will modify the chance. I like this too, because I do this a lot for thieves. Obviously, adverse conditions make success less likely, but it's also possible that certain conditions will favor success beyond the chance. Again, the DM should keep the character's ability scores firmly in mind. If something in the situation favors the use of a particular skill, then the character receives a bonus. Conversely, if something in the situation interferes with the use of the skill, the character receives a penalty. We go on to saying, assigning these situation modifiers is the most difficult part of the task, raising a pair of important questions: the size of each bonus or the penalty, and how many modifiers should be taken into account. At this point, it is important for both the DM and the player alike to remember that the AD&D system is only a game, having, like all games, arbitrary rules, limits in order to remain playable. An important part of playability is the speed at which decisions may be reached. It is possible to nitpick over every tiny factor in the situation and to assign bonuses and penalties of widely varying percentages. In the example, the DM might decide that there's dust in the air, making the rope harder to see for a 2% penalty. But the rope is so thick that it is 13% easier to grab. So do this sort of thing to adjust. It would not only be tedious, but also pointless, but you could still do it if you really want. As far as the size of the bonus and penalty increments go, the DM should pick one consistency with the rest of the game system, then stick to it despite wheedling from the players. Since many penalties and bonus and AD rules come in increments of 5 or 10%, a logical choice we make factors the chance of success from 5 and rate of 10 to 5. So it's interesting how you can do that. If our fighter were standing on a slippery ground for his jump, then he would get a negative 5% penalty. If he were up to his waist in water, the penalty could be justified up to a negative 10%. When it comes to the question of which factors to consider, a good rule is to choose only those which have a direct bearing on the skill being used, and of those, only the most dramatic. An example, the fighter may be distracted because the orcs are banging down the door, but such distraction will have each distraction will have at best only a dubious effect on his dexterity, and none at all on his strength. If, however, you were trying to use his intelligence, such distraction would require an assessment of a stiff penalty. That makes a lot of sense because he's under pressure trying to think, and DM can assign a negative probability to that. The DM should resist the temptation to consider every possible liability in the situation to figure into the final score. On the other hand, the player should resist the temptation to find every possible detail in his or her favor and demand the DM conclude it, which will always happen because That's what players do. They always want that percentage chance to actually get ahead. And I don't blame them. Why not? Consider the fighter might indeed have a slightly better chance of grabbing the rope if he removes his gauntlets, but then how is he going to carry them up? So he'd probably have to drop them on the ground, right? So it goes on. The article goes on about how you can assign percentages and consider things in the percentage of the situation. And I've always done this with various games when it comes to situation modifiers. Palladium is one I can think of right off the bat. A lot of their stuff is based on skill based percentages that you do. And it's, from 0 to 100 or 0 to 95, depending on, or 98, depending on which edition you're playing. But the DM always can assign modifiers, just like when a thief has to do something. Just because their percentage says it's 30% on the sheet doesn't mean they get 30%. There could be situations like it's dark out, it's raining, there's pressure on you because there's a guard right around the corner that may be walking right into you at that moment. So things like that will always put a modifier onto the situation. And here it tells you how to handle the situation and use these ability scores. Now I really like this. I never knew about this. Taking the attribute, multiplying it by 5, and there's your chance if you don't have a skill or some way to determine how to do the action. And when playing AD&D 1E, there really wasn't many skills, unless you get into the non-weapon proficiency stuff and all that other stuff that we never really played with. If you did, great, cool. We didn't play with it. When you get into later editions, they have skills and stuff like that for just about everything. But there is a chance that you don't. So this could apply to really any edition of D&D, from original all the way up to 2024, for all that matters. Sure, probably the later editions do have a skill that will cover everything, or a situation that covers everything at this point, but there's always going to be a chance that something doesn't. And you could do the old, all right, well, you know what? Roll a d20 and roll a 15 or higher. And if you have a strength bonus or whatever the bonus from your stat ability, add it to it, do it. And that's an easy way I've done it before, too. I think this way is a little bit more fair because it takes into account that ability scores that you have gives you the chance of how you can actually... It makes it fair to me, in my mind at least. I don't know. Tell me what you think in the comments about this. Would you use this in your campaign? Do you think it's a little weird? Do you think it's fair? I just want to know. Comment below on YouTube, or if you're going to go on Spotify, definitely comment on Spotify. I appreciate those commenting on Spotify. I love seeing those comments. Don't forget, you can support me by going to buymeacoffee.com/evilDM. You can join Spotify for 99 cents or $1 a month. Support the podcast there, or you can go to youtube.com/evilDM and /join, I think it is, to join the channel for 99 cents a month. Get videos ahead of time, and your members only stream every Friday live. With that said, I'm going to head out. Keep it original, keep it old school. Good night, and God bless, and keep those AD&D fires lit.